Marcus stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, as the alien leaders spoke to him. The war had raged for years, and humanity had only just begun to make a real impact on the galaxy. The battles were fierce, and the stakes were high. But today, Marcus had received something far beyond his expectations. He was on the alien homeworld now, the place where the leaders of the galaxy's most powerful empire gathered. It was a strange, almost eerie place, with its towering spires and shimmering technology. But none of that mattered. Today, he had been summoned to receive a reward for his bravery in battle. Marcus, a soldier who had only ever cared about the mission and his comrades, wasn't prepared for what would happen next. The aliens, a group of tall, elegant beings with glowing, translucent skin and elongated features, stood before him. They were the rulers of this galaxy, and their power had been unchallenged for centuries. Yet now, in the wake of their defeat in battle, they were here, offering Marcus something they valued deeply, something they only gave to the rarest of individuals. "You have proven yourself, human," the alien leader Talus said. His voice was deep and commanding, yet it carried an air of reluctant respect. "For your victory against our forces, you have earned a reward." Marcus stood firm, trying to keep his expression neutral. He didn't care about rewards. He had never fought for accolades or riches. But he knew that the leaders of this empire weren't offering him something simple. It was always a carefully chosen gift, meant to signify something more. The alien leader gestured to the side, and another figure emerged from the shadows. At first, Marcus thought it was just another officer or soldier, but his heart skipped a beat as the figure stepped into the light. She was an alien woman, unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Her skin was a pale blue, almost ethereal, and her hair cascaded like liquid silver, flowing smoothly down her back. Her eyes, bright like twin stars, met his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. She was tall, but graceful, like a creature from another world entirely. Yet there was something more, something in her eyes that spoke of pain, of loss. Marcus couldn't help but stare for a moment. He wasn't used to seeing such beauty, especially not in the context of war. She wasn't just another alien. She was different. There was a story behind those eyes, and though he didn't know it yet, that story would change everything. "Take her," Talus said, a strange coldness in his tone. "She is yours. A slave, as per our custom." Marcus's eyes widened as he realized what the alien leader meant. The woman, this extraordinary being, was being offered to him as a reward. She was not just a prize, but a symbol of his victory. And yet, he felt a surge of discomfort. He wasn't sure why, but something about the idea of taking another sentient being as a slave didn't sit right with him. For a moment, he thought about refusing. He had seen enough of the galaxy's cruelty to know that slavery wasn't just a custom for some. It was a weapon. It was a tool used to break spirits, to crush hope. But what could he do? He had been raised in a world of conflict, where orders were given and soldiers followed. Could he go against the very system that had shaped his life? Marcus glanced back at the woman. She stood tall and proud, her eyes locked onto his. There was a faint flicker of defiance in her gaze, a silent protest that spoke volumes. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to be a slave. And yet, she had no choice in the matter. She was bound by the decisions of others, as though she was just a piece of property to be traded. "Why me?" Marcus found his voice at last, his tone steady, though there was a tinge of confusion. "Why are you giving her to me?" Talus regarded him with a look that could only be described as a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "You have earned this right, human. You fought well, and you performed feats that even our warriors could not. You have proven your worth. It is only fitting that you receive the spoils of war." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never thought of war as something to be rewarded for. For him, it had always been about survival, about doing what needed to be done to protect his comrades and his planet. But this was something different. This was about power. And the power to own another life was something Marcus had never craved. "I don't want her as a prize," he said firmly, surprising even himself. His voice was steady, but his mind raced. "I didn't fight for this." Talis raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this response. "You have no choice. She is your reward." Marcus's heart pounded. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The alien woman's gaze never wavered. There was a sadness there, but also something else, something that stirred Marcus's deepest instincts. And in that moment, he made a decision. He would not let her be another trophy. He would not allow the system to use her as a pawn in their game of politics and conquest. "I'll take her," he said quietly, his voice a mix of resolve and regret. "But I will not keep her as a slave." Talis seemed almost amused by his defiance, but he nodded, a smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "Very well, human. But understand this, you will never be allowed to go back. Once you accept the prize, there is no turning back." Marcus looked at the alien woman one last time, his resolve hardening. She wasn't just a reward, she was a person, and he would treat her as such. The path ahead would not be easy. He didn't know what challenges they would face together, but he was determined to find out. The first step was to free her from the chains that bound her, even if those chains were invisible. Marcus didn't know what he was getting into when he made the decision to accept the alien woman as part of his reward. Standing in the sleek, cold chamber of the alien leaders, with her standing quietly beside him, Marcus couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. She was still a stranger, an enigma that had been forced upon him without consent. But one thing was clear: he could not, and would not, treat her like a prize. "Your quarters have been prepared, human," a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was one of the alien servants who had appeared without notice. She was tall and elegant, with glowing skin that matched the colors of the walls around them. Her presence was almost invisible, as though she had melted into the surroundings. Marcus glanced at the alien woman beside him. Lyra was her name, though she had not spoken a single word since the moment they had been introduced. She stood stiffly, her pale blue eyes staring forward, lost in her own thoughts. The weight of her silence felt heavier than anything Marcus had ever known. There was so much behind those eyes, so much pain that he couldn't begin to understand. "I'll take her to my quarters," Marcus said, his voice firm. He wasn't sure why he was speaking to the servant. The decision had already been made. But something about the way she looked at Lyra, as if she were an object to be moved, made Marcus uncomfortable. He couldn't allow her to be treated like that. The servant nodded and stepped aside, making no attempt to interfere. Marcus motioned for Lyra to follow him. As they walked down the long, dimly lit hallways, Marcus tried to think of something to say. But what could he say? He had no idea who she was, what her story was, or why she had been given to him in this way. After what felt like an eternity of silence, they reached Marcus's quarters. He motioned toward the door. "This is where you'll be staying." Lyra didn't move. She stood just inside the doorway, looking around at the simple but comfortable room. It was unlike the cold, sterile environment of the alien empire. Marcus had tried to make it feel as much like Earth as possible. But now, with Lyra here, it felt strange. He turned to her, his hands clasped behind his back. "You don't have to stay in the corner," he said, his voice softer this time. "You can sit anywhere you like." She met his gaze for the first time since they had entered the room. Her eyes were filled with a mix of emotion, anger, fear, and something deeper that Marcus couldn't quite place. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she lowered her gaze and nodded curtly. For a long moment, they simply stood there in silence, the tension thick between them. Marcus tried to understand the situation, but his mind raced with questions. Was he doing the right thing? What had he just agreed to? He wasn't ready for this. He had never intended to become involved in something so complicated. "I'm not your master," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "You're not a slave to me. I'm not going to treat you like one. Lyra's eyes flickered with something between surprise and disbelief. You don't understand, she replied, her voice quiet but steady. I have no choice in the matter. You don't have to treat me any differently. You are the one who decides what happens next. Marcus shook his head. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want any reward, and certainly not this. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't know what to do. I didn't even want to be here, much less be in charge of your life. Lyra's gaze softened just a fraction. You're not in charge of my life, human. You're just another player in this game. The game that's been played for years, where the winners take what they want, and the losers, well, we are what's left behind. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He didn't want to be a part of this war. He didn't want to be involved in something so cruel, something that stripped away the humanity of everyone involved. I didn't ask for any of this, Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes locked onto his. You don't get to choose. Nobody does. The sharpness in her voice took Marcus by surprise. For the first time, he saw past the image of her as just another reward. He saw the depth of her pain, the weight of her existence, and the consequences of the choices made for her. She was more than just a slave. She was a person who had been broken and forced into a role she didn't want. Marcus wasn't sure what to do next. He didn't have the answers, and the alien woman standing in front of him wasn't helping to make things clearer. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let this continue. He wasn't a fool. He understood what Lyra was saying. She had been caught in a web of power and war that she couldn't escape. She wasn't just a victim of the alien empire. She was a symbol of everything that was wrong with it. And yet, he couldn't help but feel that he had a chance to change things, to make a difference, even if it was just for her. I won't be your master, Marcus said again, more firmly this time. But I can help you, if you'll let me. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. You don't even know how. He didn't, but for the first time since the moment he had been thrust into this galactic conflict, Marcus was willing to find out. The days that followed were quiet, with an underlying tension that neither Marcus nor Lyra could ignore. They existed in the same space, their worlds still worlds apart. Marcus had been doing his best to navigate this new and uncomfortable reality. He was a soldier, not a caretaker, and certainly not someone with the training to handle the complexities of the situation. But every time he glanced at Lyra, he saw a person, not a prize, and it troubled him that he had been given this role in her life. Lyra, on the other hand, remained distant. She spoke little, her words carefully chosen and laced with caution. But Marcus noticed something in her, a quiet strength that couldn't be denied. She had been broken by the system, forced into servitude, but there was still fire in her eyes, and he admired that. It was clear that she was no ordinary slave. One evening, as the two of them sat in silence in Marcus's quarters, Lyra surprised him. She stood, as if considering something, and then moved toward the small window that overlooked the alien city below. The shimmering lights reflected off the metal buildings, casting long shadows across the room. Lyra's presence felt out of place in this stark environment, but Marcus wasn't sure where she belonged anymore. You've been looking at me like that for days, she said softly, her voice carrying the same weight as the silence that had settled between them. Marcus didn't know what she meant at first. Looking at you, he repeated, his voice cautious. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his directly. You keep watching me, trying to figure me out. But you don't know anything about me, and I'm sure you don't want to. Marcus didn't have a response for that. He had indeed been studying her, but not in the way she seemed to think. He wasn't trying to make her uncomfortable, but he couldn't help it. Every time he looked at her, he was reminded that she wasn't a simple enemy, nor was she a slave by choice. She was a person who had been forced into a terrible situation, and it left him feeling powerless. I'm not trying to make you feel like a prize, Lyra, Marcus said, standing up and moving closer to her. I don't know what to do. I didn't ask for this. I never wanted any of this. But I can't just leave things as they are. Lyra turned away from the window, her back to him now. What would you do, human? What is it that you think you can do for me? You cannot free me from this. You cannot change what has already happened. Marcus's heart sank. He knew she was right. There were so many things in this universe that couldn't be undone. The horrors of war, the cruelty of slavery, the power of the alien empire, none of it could be erased. But still, there had to be something he could offer her. Something beyond just being another person who ignored her humanity. I'm not saying I can fix everything, Marcus said, his voice quiet. But I'm not going to stand by and watch you suffer. For the first time since they had met, Lyra's posture softened. She didn't turn around to face him, but Marcus could see her shoulders relax just slightly. Her voice, when she spoke again, was quieter, almost tired. I've learned not to expect anything, human, she said. The world has taught me that. I understand, Marcus replied, but I'm not the world. Lyra remained silent, as though considering his words. The air between them felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. Marcus wasn't sure what to say next, so he simply waited, unsure of where to go from here. Over the next few days, something shifted. Lyra began to speak a little more, though still guarded. She would answer his questions with short, direct responses, but it was enough. He could sense that she was starting to open up, if only slightly. She didn't trust him yet, not completely, but there was a glimmer of something that kept him coming back, trying to understand her. One evening, as they sat together at the table, Marcus asked a question he had been hesitant to ask. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "I mean, I know you're from the Empire, but what's your life like before all of this?" For a moment, Lyra didn't respond. She stared at the table, her fingers lightly tracing the surface, as if the question itself had taken her somewhere far away. "I was a warrior," she said softly. "A leader. My people were strong. We fought for our freedom. But then, we lost." Marcus stayed silent, unsure of how to respond. He could see the pain in her eyes, the loss of her people, of her culture, of her life. It was all still fresh, even though it had happened so long ago. "They came for us in the night," she continued. "The Empire. We were unprepared. We didn't stand a chance." Marcus's heart ached as he listened. She wasn't just some random alien woman. She had a life, a history, a future that had been ripped away from her. And now she was here, stuck in this situation, with no choice but to survive. "Do you want to go back?" Marcus asked gently. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Back." She repeated the word as if it were a strange concept. "There is no going back. The war is over. The Empire won. I have nothing left." The weight of her words hung in the air. Marcus didn't know what to say. What could he say? She was right. Her world had been destroyed. But he wasn't going to let that be the end of her story. "You're not nothing," he said quietly. "You're more than what they made you." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes softening for a brief moment. "Maybe," she said, "but right now, I'm not sure what I am." Marcus sat in the dim light of his quarters, staring out at the distant stars. His mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, the weight of the decisions he had to make pressing down on him. The quiet hum of the ship around him seemed to mock his unease. He had never been one to second-guess his orders, but this situation was different. Lyra was different. The more he learned about her, the more he understood the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just a slave. She was a survivor. She had fought for her people, and now she was at the mercy of an empire that had destroyed everything she knew. Yet, despite everything, there was something in her, something strong, that refused to break. As the days passed, Marcus grew more certain of his resolve. He had to do something. He couldn't allow her to remain a prisoner in this war, trapped by the decisions of others. But what could he do? He wasn't a diplomat, a politician, or a leader of an army. He was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. But Lyra wasn't just a prisoner. She was a person who had been dealt an unfair hand. He couldn't just stand by and let her suffer. But it wasn't just Lyra that was weighing on his mind. The reality of his position began to dawn on him. The humans aboard this ship, the other soldiers who had fought beside him, had all seen what had happened. They had all witnessed his actions, his choices. Marcus's decisions didn't only affect him. They affected everyone around him. The day came when the tension became unbearable. Word had reached Marcus that the higher-ups were growing concerned about his behavior. He had refused to follow the standard protocol for dealing with captives. He had treated Lyra as an equal, given her the freedom to speak her mind, to choose where she wanted to stay, and to decide how she wanted to live under his roof. To some, this was seen as a weakness. To others, it was seen as a direct challenge to their authority. A knock on his door broke his thoughts. Marcus stood up quickly, instinctively preparing for a confrontation. It was Captain Ward, his commanding officer, and the stern look on his face told Marcus that this wasn't a casual visit. "You've got a problem, Marcus," Captain Ward said without preamble as he stepped inside. "I've been getting reports. You're getting too close to her." Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't reply immediately. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where this conversation was headed. "You're a soldier, not a diplomat. We don't get close to the enemy. Not like that," Ward continued, his voice sharp. "This isn't some civilian affair. You're not supposed to be forming bonds with a slave. She's a reminder of everything we're fighting against, and yet you're treating her like she's—" "What? An equal?" Marcus turned away, walking to the small window. The cold metal walls of the ship stretched out into the stars, an endless expanse that felt both oppressive and liberating. He didn't want to argue with Ward, but the weight of the conversation pressed down on him. He knew what Ward was saying was true in the context of war, but it didn't sit right with him. It didn't feel right. He had seen enough destruction, enough violence to last a lifetime. He wasn't going to be part of a system that treated people like Lyra as tools to be used. He just wasn't. "You think I don't know what I'm doing," Marcus finally said, his voice quiet. "I know the stakes. I know she's part of their empire. But I also know she's more than that. She's not just a prisoner to be discarded. She's someone who's been through hell, and we're supposed to help her, not use her, not break her." Ward's face softened just slightly. "I get it, Marcus. I really do. But this isn't about what's right. This is about loyalty. You're not just putting yourself in danger. You're putting all of us at risk. What if the higher-ups decide they don't like what you're doing? What if they see this as a sign of weakness, a lack of control?" Marcus felt the familiar burn of frustration rising within him. "What are we fighting for if we've already lost our humanity?" he asked, turning to face Ward. "I joined this war to protect people, not to become part of the system that destroys them." Ward's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Marcus thought he saw a flash of understanding. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the hard edge of duty. "I'm not saying you're wrong, Marcus," Ward said slowly. "But this isn't about what's right on a personal level. This is about following orders. And right now, your actions are making waves. Big waves. Waves that could come crashing down on all of us if we're not careful." Marcus swallowed hard. The weight of his position was heavier than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the choices he made, for the integrity of his actions, and for the kind of person he wanted to be. "I didn't ask for this," Marcus muttered, his voice low. "But I won't back down. I won't treat her like a prisoner when she's not." Ward sighed, his expression tight. "I wish I could say this will end well for you, Marcus, but I can't. I can't protect you from the consequences of your choices if you keep going down this path." Marcus didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence between them was enough. Captain Ward left without another word, but Marcus stayed where he was, staring at the stars. The choices before him were more than just about right or wrong. They were about loyalty, integrity, and the kind of man he wanted to be in this war. He didn't know where this path would lead him, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't live with himself if he didn't do what he believed was right. And right now, what he believed was that Lyra wasn't just a slave. She was a person, and he would do whatever it took to protect her from the system that had tried to break her. The following days were filled with tension, not just in Marcus's quarters, but throughout the ship. The whispers of his defiance to the system were starting to spread, and with it came the realization that things were not going to remain as they were for long. There was always the risk that the higher-ups in the fleet would intervene. What Marcus had done, treating Lyra with kindness, giving her the respect she deserved, was beginning to be seen as something more than just a moral choice. It was a threat to the way things had always been done. Marcus had always been a soldier, but now he was something else, a leader in a way he hadn't asked to be, a symbol of change that others might follow or fight against. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't turn back. Lyra had become more than just a consequence of his actions. She had become an ally, someone he wanted to help, not for glory or for any reward, but because she deserved a chance. It was early one morning when the shift in the air came. Marcus was walking the ship's corridors, lost in thought, when he was stopped by Sergeant Rains, a veteran soldier, and one of Marcus's most trusted men. The sergeant was tall, with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude that had earned him the respect of every soldier on the ship. "We need to talk," Rains said, his voice firm. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "What's on your mind?" Rains glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "It's about the alien woman. Lyra, right?" Marcus tensed. "What about her?" The sergeant didn't waste time. "The men are talking. And not just the men, the officers too. Some of them are, well, they're getting uncomfortable with how you're handling things. They're starting to think that you've lost sight of what this war is really about. It's not about saving every alien, Marcus. We're here to win. That's all." Marcus's heart sank. He had known this would happen, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. There was no denying it. His actions were making waves. He had hoped that they would just fade, that the decision to treat Lyra with respect would be seen as the right thing to do. But it wasn't. It was a challenge, an act of rebellion against the very system he was supposed to uphold. "I'm not saving her," Marcus replied quietly. "I'm trying to make sure she's not another casualty in this war. She's not just an enemy. She's a person." Rains didn't respond at first. He studied Marcus for a moment, his eyes serious. "I know you think that. I get it. But here's the thing, Marcus. We're at war. There's no room for mercy. There's no room for feelings. The sooner you realize that, the better off we'll all be." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Rains wasn't wrong. This wasn't a time for kindness. This was a time for survival. But still, Marcus couldn't bring himself to see Lyra as just another enemy. He couldn't look at her the way the others did, as a piece of property to be discarded. She had earned his respect. She was more than the sum of her past, and he wasn't going to be the one to throw her away. "Is this what you think?" Marcus finally asked, his voice low. Rains shifted uncomfortably, as though he didn't want to answer. "No, it's not what I think. But it's what they think. And what they think matters." Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. He knew that this was no longer just about Lyra. It was about loyalty, about the choices he had made that were starting to affect the entire crew. He had never thought of himself as a leader, but now, whether he liked it or not, that's what he had become. Every action he took, every decision, was being watched, and what he did next could change everything. Later that day, Marcus found himself in front of the command center, a large room filled with officers and high-ranking soldiers. Captain Ward stood at the head of the room, his stern face shadowed by the weight of his responsibilities. When Marcus entered, the room went quiet, every eye on him. "Marcus, you're here," Ward said, his voice neutral but tight. "Sit down." Marcus took a seat at the table, the tension thick in the air. The officers around him didn't look at him with respect anymore. They looked at him with suspicion. It was clear that the time for idle discussion was over. The higher-ups had come to a decision. "We've received reports," Ward continued, his eyes cold. "Reports about your conduct, about your treatment of the alien prisoner." Marcus stayed silent, waiting for the storm to come. "You've stepped outside the bounds of your orders," Ward did, his tone sharp. "We gave you a task, Marcus, and you failed to complete it. You were supposed to follow protocol, to treat the prisoners as they are. But instead, you've chosen to treat this one as if she were some kind of ally." Marcus's stomach churned, but he refused to back down. "She's not just a prisoner, Captain. She's a person, and I won't treat her like a thing." Ward's eyes narrowed. "You're not in a position to make moral decisions, Marcus. You're here to fight. And right now, we need you to focus on that. Your behavior is becoming a liability, not just to yourself, but to everyone on this ship." Marcus stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm doing what's right. I don't care what you or anyone else thinks. I won't treat her like an enemy when she isn't one." There was a long pause. Ward studied him, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "You're walking a dangerous line, Marcus. If you keep going down this path, you won't just lose the trust of your men. You'll lose everything." Marcus stood firm, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He had no answers, no certainty about what the future held. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't turn back. He had made a choice, and no matter what happened next, he would stand by it. The tension that had hung over Marcus's every decision seemed to grow thicker with each passing day. He had expected some pushback from the higher-ups, but the reality of their disapproval was more suffocating than he had imagined. The pressure was mounting, not only from his fellow soldiers, but also from the ever-present fear of what would happen if he crossed the line too many times. Still, he couldn't bring himself to act any differently. Lyra had become something more than a prisoner to him. She was not just an alien of the Empire. She was a person who had been forced into a terrible situation, much like many others in this war. He had made a promise to himself to help her, no matter the cost. It was late one night when the unexpected happened. Marcus had been working late in his quarters, reviewing tactical reports and trying to push back the constant pressure weighing on him. There was a knock at the door. It was a soft tap, almost hesitant, but it made Marcus's heart skip. He knew who it was before he even answered. "Come in," Marcus called out, looking up from his desk. Lyra stepped into the room. She looked different than usual, less guarded, as though something inside her had changed. Her eyes, normally distant, had a softness to them now. Marcus couldn't explain it, but something about her was different. She was no longer the cold, distant woman he had first met. There was a vulnerability in her gaze now, something that made him want to protect her even more than before. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Marcus sat back in his chair, motioning for her to sit down. "What's on your mind?" Lyra hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about treating me like a person. I wasn't sure at first, but now I realize that you're right. I'd spent so much of my life fighting and surviving. I've forgotten what it feels like to be treated as someone who matters. I'm not sure if I'm ready to trust you fully, but I think I'd want to try." The words took Marcus by surprise. He had never expected her to open up to him like this, especially after everything she had been through. It felt like a fragile moment, something that could easily be broken if either of them said the wrong thing. "I'll never treat you like an enemy," Marcus said quietly. "I can't change everything that's happened, but I can give you a chance to have your voice heard, to be more than just a prisoner." Lyra nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she said simply. But their conversation was cut short by the harsh beep of the comm system. Marcus's hand instinctively reached for the control panel, his mind already shifting back to soldier mode. He couldn't afford distractions. Not now. The ship was on high alert, and the orders he had received that day were about to come into play. "Marcus, we need you in the command center." Captain Ward's voice crackled over the speaker. "Now." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Lyra. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. She understood the gravity of the situation, as she always did. He stood up quickly, straightening his uniform and heading toward the door. Lyra followed him silently, and for the first time, Marcus didn't mind her presence. There was something oddly reassuring about having her there. He didn't know why, but he felt less alone. They arrived at the command center, where the atmosphere was thick with urgency. Captain Ward was already there, along with several other officers. The air was charged with a kind of tension that could only mean one thing. Something had gone wrong. "We've just received intel about a faction of rebels from Lyra's homeworld," Ward explained without preamble. "They're planning to strike. We don't know exactly when or where, but it's clear that this is their move to fight back against the Empire." Marcus stood straighter, his mind already racing through the possibilities. He had known this day would come. The Empire had made too many enemies, and Lyra's people were just one of many who had been wronged. "Your people, Lyra," Marcus said, his voice steady. "What do you know about these rebels? What are they planning?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with focus. "They're not just rebels," she said, her voice low but sure. "They're my people. I was once one of them. These aren't just soldiers fighting for freedom. They are the last remnants of my world's true leaders. They have been gathering, planning for this day. They won't stop until they've taken everything back." Marcus felt a jolt in his chest. Lyra had been part of this. She had fought for the same cause she had once considered lost. He didn't know what to feel. There was so much she hadn't told him about her past, so many layers to her story that he was only now starting to understand. Ward eyed her with suspicion, but said nothing. It was clear he wasn't sure whether to trust her information, but Marcus wasn't so quick to dismiss her. "If you're right," Marcus said, turning to Lyra, "then we need to act fast. These rebels won't wait for us to make up our minds. We need to stop them before they can strike." Lyra nodded. "They won't be easy to track. They move in the shadows. But I can help. I know how they think. I know their tactics." Marcus looked to Ward, who was silently watching the exchange. After a moment, Ward spoke, his voice resigned. "All right, Marcus. We'll follow your lead on this. But if this goes wrong, if this plan fails, it's on you." The weight of the decision was enormous, but Marcus didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. Lyra had offered him a chance to make things right. Not just for her, but for her people, and maybe for the galaxy itself. They would stand together, and they would fight as allies, not as master and slave. "We move now," Marcus said, his voice filled with determination. "We stop the rebels before they can do any more damage. And we do it together." The mission to find the rebels was tense from the very beginning. Marcus had never felt the weight of responsibility so heavily on his shoulders. It wasn't just his life at stake anymore. It was Lyra's, and the lives of the soldiers under his command. The stakes had never been so high, and every step they took felt like walking on a razor's edge. Lyra had provided them with all the information she could. She knew the rebel tactics, their hideouts, and the signs they used to communicate with each other. She was more than just an ally now. She was a guide, leading them through a dangerous path that she herself had once walked. But this wasn't just a mission of survival anymore. It was a mission of redemption. For Marcus, it was a chance to prove to himself that he could make a difference. And for Lyra, it was a chance to take back what had been lost. The team moved swiftly, using the cover of darkness as their ally. The rebels had grown bolder, more organized. They had learned from their failures, and now they were planning their next move. Lyra's insight into their strategies had given them an edge, but the danger was still real. They weren't just fighting against soldiers. They were fighting against the last hope of a broken people. As they approached the rebel base, Marcus found himself looking at Lyra more than he wanted to admit. She was no longer the silent, reserved woman he had met on the ship. She had become someone different, someone strong, fierce, and determined. There was fire in her eyes now, the fire of a leader who had been broken, but had never given up. "Are you sure this is the place?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low as they crouched behind a ridge. Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This is it. I can feel it. They'll be inside, waiting. They've been preparing for this moment." Marcus looked at the rebel base in the distance, a complex of rundown buildings and scattered tents. It didn't look like much, but he knew better than to underestimate it. He had seen enough to know that appearances could be deceiving. He glanced back at his team. They were ready, tense, and focused. There was no turning back now. "We move in," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We secure the perimeter first. No one gets out." The soldiers moved out, their steps synchronized and quiet as they approached the rebel base. Lyra led the way, her movements graceful and purposeful, a stark contrast to the war-torn world around her. She was no longer just a captive. She was a fighter, someone who had taken back her power and refused to be defined by the past. The entrance to the base was guarded, but with Lyra's knowledge, they were able to slip past undetected. As they infiltrated the base, Marcus's mind raced. Every corner they turned, every shadow they passed, could hide a trap, but he felt more alive now than ever before. There was something about this mission, something about standing beside Lyra, that made him feel like they were on the verge of something greater. As they reached the central building, Lyra paused. She turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "This is it, the heart of the rebellion. If we succeed here, we stop everything. But if we fail, we'll never get another chance." Marcus nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. "Then we don't fail." They entered the building, and what they found inside shocked them all. It wasn't just a group of rebels planning a strike. It was a gathering of survivors, people who had lost everything, and were now fighting for a future that seemed impossible. The room was filled with men and women of all ages, some of them armed, some of them not, but all of them ready to fight. At the center of the room stood a tall figure, a woman with the same determination in her eyes as Lyra. She looked at Marcus and the soldiers with suspicion, but when her gaze landed on Lyra, something shifted. The two women locked eyes, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire world had stopped. "You're alive," the woman said, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'm alive, and I've come to help you take back what's ours." The woman looked at her, then at Marcus and the others. "You've come to help us fight, and for that, we're grateful, but we don't trust outsiders." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You don't need to trust me. You need to trust that we're here for the same reason. We all want the same thing, to stop the Empire, to free our people. That's why we're here." There was a long pause as the woman considered his words. Finally, she nodded. "Then we fight together." The alliance was made, not just between Marcus's crew and the rebels, but between two people who had been lost in different ways, yet found each other in the chaos of war. Lyra had found her people again, and Marcus had found a cause worth fighting for. Together, they were no longer just soldiers or slaves or rebels. They were part of something bigger than themselves. The days that followed were filled with battles, both won and lost, but through it all, Marcus and Lyra remained side by side. The war was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward a future where freedom was not just a dream, but a reality. As they stood on the battlefield, looking out at the horizon, Marcus realized that the greatest victory wasn't in the fights they had won. It was in the bond they had forged. Together, they had changed the course of their destinies, and now nothing could stop them.